Lecture 9, Citizenship, Part 2, Democratic Participation. In representational democracies, citizens are encouraged to participate in politics by voting for people to represent them. There are a variety of ways that this right can be exercised. The two most common are winner-takes-all and proportional representation. The winner-takes-all method in determining who will represent the democracy is practiced in the US and Britain. The second popular system is by proportional representation, which of the two is more common. As will be seen, the winner-takes-all system encourages the formation of only two parties, while discouraging the formation of any minority parties. In contrast, when representatives are not determined by who gets past the post first, but rather by what proportion of the vote a party receives, more than two parties are likely to form. Citizens who wish to be active besides merely voting for politicians to represent them, without becoming politicians themselves, have many means to choose from. Some include, but are not limited to, joining political parties, becoming members of interest groups, signing petitions, taking public opinion polls, partaking in protests, and supporting economic boycotts. The means just mentioned are normally legal. There are, though, illegal ways in influencing politics. These range from nonviolent civil disobedience to terrible acts of terrorism where people are murdered and property is destroyed. Within representational democracies, there usually are always some means for citizens to influence the decision-making process even more directly. The ones that will be discussed in this chapter, this lecture, are referendums, initiatives, and recalls. Winner-takes-all or proportional representation. In a winner-takes-all system, also known as first-past-the-post, voters elect one candidate at a time. The candidate who receives the most votes is elected to a seat. Another name for this system is the single winner voting system. All that is needed. This method is used both in the presidential US system and in the parliamentary system of the UK. In this system, the single winner does not need to receive an absolute majority of votes. All that is needed is a relative or simple majority of votes. Often, winners in this system of voting do not represent the majority of voters. And in your transcript, I provide a diagram that helps to explain the single winner voting system. In the winner-takes-all system, Tom, who only receives 39% of the vote, is the only winner. 39% of the vote, though, is not an absolute majority. An absolute majority, of course, needs to be above 50%. The winner-takes-all system de-incentivizes small parties from forming because voters fear that if they do not vote for one of the two major parties, which tend to resemble each other more than the fringe parties do, they will have wasted their vote. One benefit that this system affords to the political process is that it tends to bring about greater political stability. At what cost, though? To what extent are the diagrams that are presented in your transcript accurate? To be politically and economically secure, do we need to give up and sacrifice certain freedoms? Similarly, to have a stable political process, should a wide spectrum of voter opinions be institutionally discouraged? Is the institutional discouragement of minor parties from forming too high a cost? What do you think? The other political democratic system for determining who will represent the people is called proportional representation. In proportional representation systems, the number of seats a party wins is determined by the proportion of votes they receive. Usually, a party must receive at least a certain number of votes to win a seat. For example, the threshold could be set at 5%. Parties that do not receive at least 5% of the vote will not, therefore, win a seat. Once a party passes this threshold, there needs to be a system to determine which of their candidates will represent the voters. In a popular method called the list system, political parties rank their candidates on the ballots. If the party only wins one seat, then the seat goes automatically to their top-ranked candidate and so forth. There are many variations of the list system. Another method is called the single transferable voting system, where voters list their preferred candidates according to rank. If the voter's first choice candidate does not receive enough votes, then his votes are transferred to the second candidate on the voter's list, and so forth. And I provide a diagram in the transcript. And if the voting threshold is set at 5%, if you look at the diagram, which party did not receive enough votes to win a seat? Note that according to the diagram, voters only vote for a party and not for a candidate. How would this diagram need to change to represent the single transferable voting system? Finally, do you see how the proportional representation system can lead to political stability and fragmentation, especially if the threshold is set very low, such as at 5%? Non-voting ways of being politically active. Citizens can be politically active by joining political parties, joining interest groups, signing petitions, taking public opinion polls, partaking in protests, and supporting economic boycotts. There are, of course, illegal ways of being active, some involving violence and others do not. I will focus our attention on two common legal ways of active political participation: polling and interest groups. Poll taking. One very common way that a citizen can participate in politics is by taking a poll, and may, as a result, influence a political outcome. Most people, though, don't connect taking a poll with influencing public opinion. There is, though, a connection. When a poll is taken, the poll taker gathers data, and after assembling it, presents it. If the data is only presented to a few social scientists, then the likelihood that the data will influence political opinion is very low. However, this is not what typically happens. Data is collected and assembled precisely with the hope to later present it so as to influence the political opinion of the general public and of powerful interest groups and people. Because of the potential political influence the presentation of polls can have, polls are carefully phrased to more likely obtain the desired results. For example, which question below do you think will people respond yes to? More. And the first question is, do you think you are religious? And the second one is, do you feel you're religious? Sometimes, when emotional language is used, people are more likely to respond in a different way than if they're asked practically the same question, but in reference to mental activity. To be more exact, or to be more capable in manipulating data, pollsters will take several steps, including random sampling, tracking voters' voting patterns, and other behavior, and dividing people into subgroups before taking the poll. The latter method is called stratified sampling. Interest groups. Forming or joining an interest group is another method to influence politics. Interest groups aim at influencing the decision-making process by championing specific issues through the mass media, by backing and promoting political candidates they like, and by lobbying current elected politicians. A few examples in the U.S. are as follows: American Civil Liberties Union, AFL-CIO, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the American Association for Retired Persons, Greenpeace, Latino Vote, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The list goes on. In the USA, interest groups have become so influential that politicians sometimes are persuaded by powerful interest groups representing a powerful minority more than they are by the interests of the common voter who elected these politicians. Direct democracy in representational democracies. Representational democracies include some direct means for citizens to engage in politics. Referendums, initiatives, and recalls are a few ways where this occurs. Referendum. In a referendum, as the name indicates, a public policy question is referred to the voters. The initiative in this case comes from the leaders on the top who refer a question to the bottom, or common citizens. For example, in 1975, citizens in the UK, comprising England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, were asked if they wanted to remain in the European Economic Community. A majority voted yes. On September 18, 2014, the Scottish people in a referendum voted 55 to 45% to stay within the UK and not break off as a country independent of the UK. On June 23, 2016, all UK voters were asked if they wanted to remain or leave the EU. A slight majority voted to leave the EU. As a result, the UK began the process to withdraw from the EU. Citizens' Initiative. In a citizens' initiative, once again, as the name indicates, the voters initiate direct political action by filing a petition. The initiative in this case comes from the bottom, or common citizens. If the petition is validly signed by a minimum number of registered voters, then a public vote can take place. In 2008, Californian citizens gathered enough valid petition signatures for a proposition to be placed on the Californian ballot. It was called Proposition 8. Proposition 8 asked voters in California whether the state constitution should be amended by restricting marriage to a man marrying a woman. A majority of voters agreed to the amendment, but then, in 2013, in Hollingsworth versus Perry, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Proposition 8. Voter recall. In a recall, after enough registered voters validly sign a petition, an elected official can be removed from office. Rules governing a recall, as with the Citizens' Initiative, vary from state to state and from country to country. One successful recall occurred in 2003 when the Democratic Governor Gray Davis of California was recalled for financial reasons. The Republican and former action movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger then won the recall election. Actual active participation. Despite the plethora of ways to influence the direction a democracy will take, citizens often choose to be passive by not even exercising the right to vote. Why is this the case? Why are voting rates so low in the U.S.? Some argue that citizens who are active usually do not influence decision-making any more than those who vote do. Political participation by the common person is claimed an illusion. They argue that despite what most people want in a democracy, the elite will continue to rule and make decisions that are primarily aimed at benefiting themselves and their elite friends. Others strongly disagree with this pessimistic elitist theory, which they claim is an overly simplistic view of the complex nature of democratic processes. What is your view? Another question regarding active participation is as follows. Should people only actively engage in politics on issues that concern them individually, or should there also be active political engagement on issues that concern everyone? Is this even possible? St. Thomas Aquinas not only thought this was, but also held that pursuing the interests of the common good and not merely the interests of the individual is required in a just state. According to Aquinas, in part following Aristotle, since man is social by nature, it is natural for man to live in society, for only here does man attain his natural end that is meant to be fulfilled supernaturally by grace in the heavenly Jerusalem. The end of human society is not only to protect the private goods of the citizens, but also to seek the supreme human good, the common good, which is superior to the good of an individual. End of quote. For Aquinas, the end of society, as well as for the individual, is that all live virtuously and eternal beatitude. Do you agree with this vision? Why or why not? And if so, how ought a state seek, I quote from Aquinas, the supreme human good, the common good, which is superior to the good of an individual? God bless.